Welcome back, guys. So I've been using my Loki Zero for the past week and it's been a lot of fun, I have to say. I do have my complaints, but every time I feel like complaining, I have to remind myself that this thing was $250, $200 for me. So I have to give it some slack there. But before we get into that, let's talk about the specs of this thing. So this thing uses an Athlon Silver 3050E CPU and an AMD Radeon GPU. You have the option between 4 and 8 gigabytes of RAM and 128 gigabytes and 256 gigabytes of storage, but the 256 gigabytes only comes if you get 8 gigabytes of RAM. You can get 128 gigabytes with 4 or 8. So the really only option you have is between 4 gigabytes and 8 gigabytes of RAM, and the storage only changes for 8 gigabytes. Now those are different from how it was advertised. They did advertise it as having 64 gigabytes of internal storage, and the original listing said it had 4 gigabytes of RAM, but there was an add-on that let you add 4 gigabytes of RAM onto the Zero if you really wanted to. I didn't, and that's why I have 4 gigabytes of RAM. Now it also has a 6-inch 1080p display, which is different as well because the original listing said it would have a 6-inch 720p display. And I guess they kind of got lazy or whatever and didn't want to, or not lazy, but like they didn't want to switch like parts, so they just used the same screen that they use in all the other devices for this device, because I'm not sure it would really make sense to make one device with a 720p display and all of the others use a 1080p display, so they kind of just gave a free upgrade, which is nice. I mean, it's more bang for your buck, but it's just weird how they advertised a different product than I ended up getting. I'm not angry about it. I'm obviously happy I got a better screen and more storage, but I just think it's weird. I can't be the only one that thinks it's weird that they just switched up the listing and the product specs like a week before I got it, or after, because they didn't even change the listing until after I got it. Anyways, it also has a 46.2 watt hour battery and retails for $250. It used to be $200, but that was the pre-order price, and they've since changed that. I didn't know that was the pre-order price until like late last year, because I pre-ordered it and I just thought the price would be $200, because there's a lot of these like Chinese manufacturers that put their product at a certain price and then just market as a discount so that people will think it's a better deal and then buy it. I don't know. They actually changed the price for this one. The price change is weird regardless, and I do have to take it into account when I'm deciding if this is a good thing to recommend to you guys. So when talking about the hardware and software of this thing, it's going to be hard for me to differentiate it too much from the Loki Max review that I did earlier. So if I use similar language, or if I say something I said in the Loki Max review, don't get mad at me. It's just that these things are very similar. But nonetheless, I do actually like the shell and all the hardware this thing has on it. The shell does feel a bit different from the Loki Max, but I'm not entirely sure that's because of the Loki Zero just being cheaper. It might just be because this is black and this is white. I don't have a black Loki Max, so I won't be able to like say if it's the exact same, but that's certainly possible that the shell feels different just because it's a different color. It's not like a major difference. It's just like this one feels a little like smoother. It just feels like a little bit of a different texture, which is weird. I know that on their website, they list the thicknesses between the models as different, so it's obvious that they did use a different shell, but I'm not sure if it feels different because it's a different shell or if that's just because it's a different color. Like I said, I'm not sure they would just lower the quality of the shell for no reason, especially since they upgraded the internal storage and screen for no reason. So if they upgraded those, I'm not sure they downgrade this shell. Obviously there's a chance that I'm wrong, and if you have a Loki Max and Loki Zero that are both in the color black, let me know if I'm wrong in the comments, but the likelihood of you having both is very slim. You'd either have to be another emulation YouTuber or like someone who just like likes these devices, which I mean, I understand, but I mean, even if I just liked these devices and didn't have a channel, I would not have bought 2 of these. I only bought the Loki Zero because I wanted it for the content. You know what else? These buttons also feel different from the Max, which I can't actually blame on the color this time because the material shouldn't be that different. And it's not even like the buttons feel different like the actual buttons. It's like the travel distance feels a little shorter and they just feel weird. It's not a major difference. They still feel great for a Windows handheld, but it's like, why do they feel different? Why? Again, not a big deal, barely even a deal at all. I just wanted to point it out. They do feel good though. I know I complained that they have a shorter travel distance, but they do actually feel nice for how much travel distance they have. The sticks do feel good. They feel a bit smaller than the ones on the Max, but that's not something most people are gonna notice because like I said, I doubt most people are going to have both a Loki Max and Zero. So that's not something you have to worry about. There are analog triggers, which are good for GameCube games and like any other system that supports analog triggers. They don't feel too big and they travel a perfect distance, which I think is fun. They're pretty much the perfect size, which is great for a Windows handheld because Windows games use analog triggers more than Android games, I'd assume. And there's just a larger library of games that support analog triggers on Windows. So the D-pad feels pretty much the same. I felt like it was substantially different from the Maxes when I unboxed this, but now that I kind of have the two next to each other, it doesn't. I don't know if I was just like on something, but this feels pretty much the exact same. The screen is the same as the one on the Max, so there's really nothing I can really say. One complaint about this screen that I don't think I mentioned in my review for the Max is that I feel like the colors are a little overblown. I'm not sure if they fixed this with the Zero. We're gonna find out when I do some emulation testing. But the colors, like especially in like Mario Kart Wii, they look like washed out. Like it looks a little too white or bright, if that makes sense. Not a deal breaker, obviously, but I still do think it's a big deal. And probably something you could calibrate in the settings. I just wanted to point it out because I doubt many people are gonna be going into the settings and doing like a reset. Now, software is where this gets tricky because when I reviewed the Loki Max, I didn't have access to the other operating system that we're going to test out besides Windows. But now that I have access to it on both of these devices through the SD card slot, we are going to talk about both of them. But before we jump to the newer one, let's talk about Windows. So the Windows experience on here is pretty much the exact same as it was on the Max. The same shortcuts and everything work. I haven't downloaded the wallpaper that someone made that I use on the Max to like remember the shortcuts, but they all work the exact same. Apps and such work the same. If you can download it on the Loki Max, you can download it on here. Same goes for games, but we'll talk about it a little later. That doesn't exactly mean everything's gonna work well. Like on the Max, there isn't much that they did to kind of optimize the Windows experience with a controller other than the shortcuts that I already mentioned. I feel like some of the blame should go to Microsoft for this because I haven't exactly made Windows 11 or 10 very portable device friendly at this point, but I'm sure I could have done something. The Loki Control Center is AYN's way of letting the user control how much TDP or like power is being used by the device. If you want to play something more powerful, you increase the TDP. You know, that's how it works. Now, it's not too much different from how it worked on the Max. The main difference though, a big difference, is that the TDP only goes up to 20 compared to 34 on the Max, which I'm not entirely sure putting the Zero above 20 would really get you any more power, but it is a noticeable change. And a notable change. Other big changes I noticed. The auto mode for the lighting only changes the colors between red, blue, and green. Why is that? I don't know why it does this because it can display all the colors and the Loki Max can do the exact same thing but display all the colors in the auto mode. Like, I'll set the, you know what? Let me make sure I'm correct with this. Auto. Oh wait, I think I'm wrong. I think I got that confused. That can't be correct. That can't be right. I don't think that's right. I remember when I got this thing, the auto mode switched between like different things. It switched between different colors. Why is it only red, green, and blue now? This was like a complaint I had, and now I'm looking back at footage from my unboxing, and it's only switching between red, green, and blue. I am actually stupid. I'm stupid. I don't know what made me think that the Loki Max's auto mode switched between all the colors, but it doesn't. It should though. I don't know why it doesn't. Like if I go in manual and I go like this, that switches between all the colors. Why can't it just do that? And the Loki Zero can do all the same colors. Why can't I just do that? That's stupid. It's a dumb thing to complain about, but just let us go through the colors. Why not? Those are the only major differences in the Loki Control Center, and one of them isn't even valid anymore. So ignore that. Now, the next part of the software talk also coincides with the emulation talk, so I'm not really sure how I'm gonna chapter this. I might just put software/emulation and then the name of the software we're using, but I'll figure that out in editing. But that's because this has to do with JelOS, or JelOS. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. A Linux firmware that has been ported to the AYN Loki. Now you will need a spare SD card to flash the firmware onto, but let me give you a brief walkthrough through the steps. So you're gonna need to have a spare SD card, like I said. You're gonna need to go to the GitHub page for JelOS and download a file there that corresponds to your device. there's going to be a list of devices that support it, and there will be a flash file that you can use to flash onto it. Then you're going to need an app like Balena, I don't know how to pronounce that. Balena Etcher, I think that's how it's pronounced, to flash the firmware onto the SD card. It won't have ROMs on it initially, and I, for the life of me, could not figure it out for like the first 2 days of me having this on there, but I figured it out, and we'll go over it a little later because that's not the priority right now. Launching into it is pretty annoying since you do need to go through a few steps, and you do kind of need to connect a USB keyboard for some reason. You'll need to boot into like recovery mode or safety mode or whatever, and go to UEFI settings to be able to change where it boots from. So once you're in the recovery settings, in the UEFI, is that what it is? UEFI, you have to change the default launch from, like where it launches from, to the SD card slot. And then once you press save and exit, it'll launch from the SD card slot, which has JelOS on there, and it'll install, like do a bunch of stuff, and then you'll have JelOS on there. Fun. The only way I was able to get to those settings was by holding shift while restarting the device, which is really annoying because I had to plug in a USB keyboard to be able to hold down shift while it's restarting. And I wish there was a way, if there is a way, I'm gonna look really stupid when I say this, but I wish there was a way to launch into that without having to plug in a USB keyboard, because I've had multiple times where I've taken out the SD card so I could boot back into Windows and it's switched the default. So I have to like plug it back in just to get it to launch from the SD card again. That's so annoying. Please, if any of you know how to fix this, please tell me, because I am stupid. I know stuff, but like that is just a different world for me. Now, JelOS is an amazing front end for emulation, especially for a device like this, because one, you won't have to deal with navigating Windows. 2, it improves the performance for a lot of games. And 3, you can easily boot back into Windows by removing the SD card. I'll do some comparisons between the Windows performance and JelOS performance once it's time for emulation, but right now, that's what we're dealing with. Once you do boot into JelOS, there are 3 different themes that are available to you through the UI settings. Keep it at the default one. The other 2 are very ugly. Game settings lets you change stuff system-wide for games, like if you want to change the aspect ratio that everything scales to, if you want to make everything 16:9, you can do that without going into the individual emulator settings. Network settings is important because if you want to transfer ROMs onto this thing using JelOS, it's important that you use the network settings. While we're talking about ROMs, why don't we just go through how I did it and how I got ROMs on here. So to get ROMs on this thing, you'll need to use an app called WinSCP. I'm pretty sure any like FTP or like wireless transfer app will work, but WinSCP worked the best for me, and that was the only one I could really get working. So if you're on Windows, I recommend that one. If you're on like Mac OS or something, sorry dude, I don't know how to work Mac. Anyways, you'll need the IP address of your system, and to get that, you're gonna need to connect your device to the internet, which will be in the network settings. There's an option to connect to the internet. Now, when I tried to connect to the internet, my home network did not come up, so I had to manually type in the name and then the password, and it connected. So if it doesn't come up, just manually type them in and it'll connect. Once you are connected to the internet, at the top of network settings, you will see your IP address, the device's IP address, which you will need to write down so that you can put it into WinSCP. And farther down in the network settings, you'll need to enable SSH and Samba. I'm not sure how to pronounce that, but you have to scroll down a little bit. They're under network services, and those are going to be essential for transferring your ROMs. The username will be root for the device, and the password is going to be in your settings, the system settings. It changes every time you reboot, so don't like reboot your system unless you like have to. I mean, obviously it's not going to be a big deal, but just know that if you do reboot your system or turn it off fully and then turn it back on, you're going to need to change the password if you want to transfer ROMs again. Not a big deal, I just thought I'd point it out. Once you get all that information into WinSCP, it'll give you a bunch of folders listed out that you can put your ROMs into. It could take a while to transfer just because it is over Wi-Fi, but once you get it in there, it should work. All of the systems I've tried have worked, except for Wii U. I'm not entirely sure why that is. I've tried like taking the RPX file or whatever out of the folder and just putting it in the Wii U folder, or just like doing whatever I can, but nothing works. And you might be like, oh, I guess Wii U just doesn't work on JelOS. Not true. Retro Game Corps tweeted, this is how I learned about JelOS. Game Corps tweeted about this, and you want to know the system that was displayed on his tweet? Wii U. But no matter what I did, I couldn't get Wii U to show up. You'd like update the game list, wasn't there. All of the other ROMs are there. For some reason, Wii U isn't. I don't know, dude. Anyways, the individual game subfolders have their own settings that you can change. So if you want to change, like in GameCube, if you want to make the A button where the A button is, or if you want to make it where the B button is, those are options you can do. You could also change the aspect ratio of most games, if not all of them. And it just offers you a lot of settings, which is nice. There is also an option in the system settings, I should have said this earlier, but there's an option in the system settings to change what color the RGB is at and the light, like how bright it is, which is good because I think, I changed it to RGB lighting for this video, but I think purple looks the best, especially on this black device. Like, does that not look best for a device like this? Like, it's like some bright color looks best on the Max because that goes well with the white. Like, it's either like light blue or something like that, but purple looks incredible. Maybe it's just because they don't like contrast badly. They like look nice. It's like purple's a dark color, so is the black on here, so it looks nice. I'm not entirely sure why it is. I just think they look the best. Now that we're done with that, let's get into some emulation testing. So after that, it's obvious that this thing is not the most powerful device on the market, but did you really expect it to be? It's $250 for a Windows handheld. I certainly didn't. I only got it because I knew it was going to be not very powerful, and I wanted to make content on it. I wanted to make videos about it. What I will say is that if you're buying this primarily for emulation, which I assume a lot of you, or a lot of the people that are buying this are, get an SD card and put JelOS on it. It's the best front end for emulation right now on here, and it's way better than navigating Windows. And this thing doesn't really play many Windows games anyway. It plays a lot of indie games well, like Celeste. I'm sure it plays Cuphead well. I haven't tried it. Curse to Golf and Stardew Valley all work great on here, but I've tried games like Blue Fire. Blue Fire just straight up loaded incorrectly for me, and Super Monkey Ball, the newer one, that runs pretty badly. If you want this thing, you want it for emulation or indie games, and I probably go towards the emulation. Overall, I do struggle to say if this is a good buy or not, because unlike all of the Android handhelds I've reviewed and talked about on this channel, I feel like this is being held to a different standard. For Android handhelds, the primary sell for them is emulation. Some of them don't like to say that. I mean, AYN kind of didn't when they were talking about the original Odin, but it's obvious that with the controls on the sides, the main thing they're selling it for is emulation. This thing is a little different, mostly because it's a Windows handheld. Windows handhelds, I think, are held to a different standard just because you're playing Windows, you're expecting more out of it. Android gaming is a thing. I mean, it's certainly bigger than it is on iOS. Maybe not anymore, but it certainly was like 3 months ago. But emulation was certainly a bigger gaming factor on the Android side of things than gaming was. Whereas on Windows, I would say that gaming is way bigger than emulation. Emulation is still very present, but if you're gaming on Windows, you're likely gaming an actual game and not a emulator. These Windows devices are different, the Loki Zero and Loki Max specifically, because they're not sold with the specific intent of emulation. They're sold as alternatives to the AYN Neo devices, the Steam Deck, other Windows handhelds, the ROG Ally. They're sold as alternatives to those. And it's kind of hard to compare this to those, especially since it's slow and not as powerful, but I kind of have to compare it to those. Because you hear Windows handheld, I think emulation. Other people think AAA games. So it really just comes down to the person, and also it's a really hard recommend. But also you have to take into account that the Loki Zero costs $50 less than the base Odin 2 is retailing for, or at least was on the Indiegogo page. So now I don't know how to pitch this thing. I guess I'll just say this. If you want a handheld PC, but care more for the emulation than the PC games, say you have like a few indie games you want to play, but you do care a lot about emulation more so, and they're like retro games, like you want to play GameCube or Wii, this is probably a good buy. But if you're interested in anything else, like you want to play some 3D games, go with a different model or a different device. Like the Steam Deck might be better for that. Emulation is what's really selling this device, and that shouldn't be the case because the Odin Lite is still on their store for $50 cheaper and can pretty much play the exact same games. Now, I am stupid, so I haven't been able to get Wii U games running on here, but why do you want to play Wii U games on the go? What kind of freak are you? I honestly, and I'm being so serious when I say this, have no idea who this device is for. I'm more interested in bigger AAA games, so I'll be spending more of my time with the Loki Max than I am with the Loki Zero, because the Loki Max can play those AAA games while also playing all of the emulators I want it to. But I guess I'll just keep this thing with the SD card installed for JelOS, to kind of keep as like a portable emulator. But like, if I want to play GameCube games and Wii games at an okay frame rate, I'll just play it on a smaller device. I'll play it on the Retroid Pocket 2S or the RG405V that I just got. I don't know. AYN has been laser focused on trying to get the cheapest Windows handhelds, like the cheapest gaming handhelds out for the past 2 years. And it's very hard for me to recommend this because it's like, yeah, they got a cheap Windows handheld out at $250, but who's gonna buy it? Like really, I would recommend any other Loki model instead of this one. This is just a product of them trying to get the cheapest model out, which I respect, but like, is it really necessary? Of course not, none of these are necessary. But I mean literally, does this thing have a place in the market? I don't know. I guess we'll find out. But what do you guys think? Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think this takes are bad? Do you think this thing is gonna be a runaway success? Do you think this is stupid? Do you agree with me? What do you think? Do remember that this is just my opinion. This thing could be a runaway success tomorrow. This thing could start selling a ton. But I don't think so. You can think differently. If you do think differently, or if you just want to reaffirm my opinion, leave a comment down below telling me what you think. And I will probably respond. I don't have a life, so I don't know what else to do. Better yet, why don't you like the video as well? Subscribe down below. Give me that boost in the algorithm. I want it. I want the help. I want subscribers. I'm very greedy. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you later this week for my RG405V unboxing, because I got impatient and opened it a little bit too early. But I will see you a little later. Goodbye.